Hello there everyone, Inky Fingers here, and this is Inky Fingers Architectural Art. Thanks for dropping by. Now today I'm going to be using UniPin fineliners to produce a scene from the Yorkshire Dales, consisting of a dry stone wall and an old building in the mid-distance. We've got some trees and we've got some landscape around it. Now the thing about architectural work is that buildings are usually made from different materials: stone, brick, stucco, wood, and they all have texture. So it's a very good idea to draw things and render them with the pens to achieve, or try to achieve, the texture of what that object actually is made of. To get the shading, using cross-hatching to achieve texture, shading, shadow. So to draw other things, there may not be a building, for example in this case a dry stone wall in the foreground, it's still going to be made from the same material as the buildings, especially buildings in Yorkshire. So it's very good practice still to do these type of things to improve on your skills of providing texture to these type of objects. So in this picture I'm going to be looking at perhaps doing some stippling, some cross-hatching, maybe some squarely things, or what the technical word is to that, I'm not really too sure, but anything to make a mark, anything to make a bit of texture. So without further ado, let's get on with it, shall we? Now the picture we're going to paint today is this scene. So as I've said, we've got a scene in Yorkshire. We've got a nice stone wall, a dry stone wall. We've got a little building, stone building, looks like a barn in the mid-distance. And we've got just some grass and trees and a bit of landscape. But we're more interested in the stonework, because if you can draw and render in pen the stonework, then you could easily render a building, because this building will be made out of this stone. But what's also a very good idea to do, if you're going to do something in basically black and white, because we do it in pen, is to have a picture or a copy of that colour picture you've just seen converted to black and white. Because as we're not really working with colour, now when it's all done you could put a touch of colour here and there, but really it's going to be more of a high contrast black and white picture. So we don't really need a colour picture. Having a black and white picture, you can see all the tones. So if we look at this, we can see all the different tones of the stonework. So it's just much easier to render this out with the pen, doing light against dark, dark against light, but only use this as a guide. We can put darker bits, lighter bits within the stonework when you're painting the picture or drawing the picture to make the picture how you want it to be. Now the pens we're going to be using are going to be UniPin fineliners, a brush pen. Now as for the width of the nibs, we can have a few different things depending on how thick we want the line. We can have a pen which gives a 0.3, which gives quite a thick line. Then we can go down to 0.1. Now these two pens will be for the general outline, especially in the foreground where we want thicker lines, we want more bolder lines. And then for the fine details, i.e. the hatching, the cross hatching, the actual texture itself, we can use a 0.05 here. We can see it gives quite a fine line, and even going down to a 0.03 for some extra fine details. These four pens will do all of that. And for some deeper shadows in places, we can use, is a good pen I like to use, is the Pentel brush pen, pocket brush pen, which gives some nice thick lines, some marks. You can do fine lines, go down to thick and down to fine lines again. And maybe it's using a pen like this in some of the deeper shadow areas, it'll enable us to achieve that quite high contrast black and white type of look we want. So I've already drawn the picture out, but I have changed it in places. For example, in the original image we have all of these houses, a little village in the background. I've left all of this out. We will have like a bit of a fence there and something here. I've left all that out. And I've left some trees out. In the drawing, we could put trees in the when we actually ink it in with the pens, but really I don't think you really need to draw all that type of detail in with the pencil, because we might leave it out. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. So I'm starting off with the 0.3, and all I really want to do is to try and do quite a rough and ready, i.e. not neat, outline of what I've already done with the pencil. Now the paper is just a cheap sheet of watercolour paper. It doesn't have to be fantastic because we're pretty much doing this just black and white. And this is the paper that here in the UK they sell in the range, the Art Studio's own brand, the Range's own brand. I've used it in other videos in the past. For the price, it's surprisingly good. Not perfect by any means. It's not like Bockingford quality, but for messing around or taking out, if you want to do things outside, then it's fine. If you don't want to take any more expensive paper out or just messing around, trying ideas out, this paper is fantastic. But what this paper is really good for is putting pen on. So these are just all the big blocks of the dry stone wall. I haven't copied exactly to the photograph. It's pretty near, but of course when you're doing something like this, it isn't a building, it's just a collection of rocks in the dry stone wall. So we don't really need to be exact. Perspective doesn't really come into play here. This is just some grass, because we'll have some grass in the foreground. And we can see I'm not putting any actual texture as of yet in the anything in the wood or in the rocks. I put a little line there, which could be just a little crack, but any real texture, little cracks or whatever, maybe there's a crack there or a split there, I'm not putting any of that in just yet. And that's the foreground put in with the 0.3 nib. Now we're going back a little bit. I don't want to put, or we can't put, the 0.3 nib in the mid distance because it's too thick. We need that a little bit recessed. So I'm going to make it appear that it might be a little bit more in the background by simply using a thinner nib. So we now go to the 0.1. And that will have the thinner nib, so it's going to automatically look like it's a little bit further in the distance, simply by the thickness of the line. And we can also, of course, just loosen our grip or the pressure on the pen, and that will automatically, of course, make an even thinner line, and it'll make it appear like it's a little bit further in the background. And that's it. That's the initial stages inked in. Didn't take very long at all. So the first thing I always do is, for example, if you do a watercolour, of course you traditionally put the lightest tones on first, let it dry, and then you put darker tone, darker tone, darker tone until it's completed. But something like this, I always start with the opposite. I put in all the dark tones first. So this is going to be any like cracks in between one stone and the other, any little gaps, that type of thing. And this is where I use the brush pen, the Pentel in this case. Once if we look at the picture once again, we can see that we have, because it's a dry stone wall, we have all of these areas between corners between that stone, and that stone. We've got these dark areas. Now we want those to be quite dark. Of course we could do them with the UniPin and just do very fine cross hatching to darken it up. But if you want a nice sort of high contrast black and white, then it's easier to just use something like a brush pen or some ink and a paintbrush. This of course is a mixture of the two. So we have, for example, like we can have between this stone here, this stone here, that stone and that stone, we've got a dark gap. And I just put that little bit of dark going across there. Now this is where this brush does come in, because it's so fine, the tip, you can get very tiny little brush marks. We can have, now I'm not really copying this, I'm just looking at where these stones are and just doing some little dark areas. Like here's one, an area there, very dark there, so caution to the wind, just do it. We've got to have these tones, and the reason I'm putting the darkest tones in first, the darkest areas, is that once all the darks are in, then you can concentrate more on the slightly lighter one parts, maybe the mid-tones. And then when you start to put the different sort of mid-tones in, then you are going to be left with pretty much the highlights. And then you can put like the highlights in. Of course the highlights are not going to be just plain paper, they're going to be pen, still ink, but hatched, not cross-hatched, maybe it's just hatched, going in one direction, but very lightly. That's going to give still going to give the impression of light, because we've already put all of the darks and midtones in. And when you put the darks in, as I'm doing now, like that could be a nice dark area just there, and maybe it's a little bit down there. But once you put all these in, it gives you a very good framework of what the picture is. To me, it makes it much more simpler to actually work out the different tones. In this one we'll put a little bit like this jagged part, just to make it look like that this block here, it's chipped, it's not a flat, it's not a brick, it's irregular. Same with here, we'll have like a little something like that on the same block, so it looks like it's all chipped and worn. We don't want things looking new. And I shall just do this, filling in the gaps of this little cluster of stones and this area, and then I'll be back. And that's the darkest areas of the rocks done. You see, it gives us something to the picture already, simply because of the darks. It defines the rocks a bit better, so all we need to do now is to start shading in the rocks, putting the texture in the rocks. Now to start this off, I'm going to be using the 01 pen, and what we need to find out or be wary of is, again, the shape of of the rock. Now we could have some rocks. You could do the hatching and cross hatching either vertically or horizontally. We could have them done at sort of a slight angle. If we've got, say for example, this rock here, if we'd have something like that, then we're going to have a shape to it. So we can do some vertical shading or texture in this part, and then some sort of horizontal-ish type of shading in this area, just to form the shape of the rock. So all I'm going to do here is, and I always do this quite lightly, just single hatches, and I'm treating this as a mid-tone. So if we put this way, then it'll give the impression that it's sort of going up and around. So once I've got this mid-tone in, then I can look at it and say, okay, where do I want some cracks? So I'll go along the top and I'll start and modify the shape by putting some little cracks in. There you go. We'll just put a little bit of dark there, so that looks like the corner of this block is now chipped off. You can put a few little lines there. Now I think that this pen is 0.1, it's not a thick nib, it's going to be a little bit too thick, so I'm going to go to the 005, and I'm going to start. Now remember, the sun is coming down, so this is going to be in sunlight, that's going to be in sunlight, this part is going to be more in shadow, so I'm going to do a little bit more hatching there, and then I'm going to darken that up by putting some cross hatching in. There we just so we've got a dark area facing away from the sun, that way. And then I'll just go back into this side here and do some lines, some little marks, to make it look like it's got some texture, some cracks. And now I might even go to the 003, which is basically the finest nib that UniPin do. Which I do actually like using this than 003. And I'm just going to do a little bit more, maybe a few lines, but not vertically, slightly on an angle, just to make it look like it's got a little bit more shading here and there, and just a little bit of texture. Remember, this is just only a small block, so we just want to make the impression that it's textured, because remember, we're going to be looking at this from a little bit of a distance. I'm just going to do a little bit more shading on this side, and leave it at that. We'll go on to this rock here. Now again, I'll just use the 003 for this, for the full thing, because you could do it with just the one nib. And I'm going to just do a very faint, I'm not putting any pressure on really, just to get rid of the white paper and give a sort of a lightish tone onto that rock. And then once again, let's see what sort of shape is this rock going to be. First off, I'm going to put a few maybe cracks, a few little marks, just like I did with this one. I'm going to just do a little line because this rock is now going to be, this is the sunlit area, and this bit's going to be sort of shading or going away a bit more of a round shape. So I'm going to put this down here in a bit more sun shadow, just by doing some hatch work over what I've already done. And blend it off a little bit so it's darker there, lighter there as it goes around the curve. And then in this area here, I'm going to then go on an angle and start to do a little bit of cross hatching. Just get it darker down right to the bottom here. So we've got a nice bit of texture. So I'll continue with these other rocks, and then I'll do some, but I'll speed the video up a bit. Now this is this side of the stones all toned in. So now it's done. It's still a bit bland. So as the tones are in, I can now look at it and decide where I want some detail, some cracks or a few more tones. For, let's see, I think maybe it's in this long sort of block of stone here. I think I'll just put a little bit of tone here. One or two cracks, like a horizontal crack here, coming from this darker shadow area, like so. A few little bits and bobs, just to marks really, just to make it look like it's pockmarked. This rock here, it's a little bit bland at the bottom there, so I'm just going to put a few little marks. Maybe a little bit of cross hatching here, just so it looks like it's going this way and then it juts round. So it's more like a square-ish type of rock. A little bit of dark there, because this now of where I did earlier on is quite a dark void, so I'm just going to darken up a few little bits of lines here, just so you can see a tiny little bit of this rock showing, so it looks like it's going into the void. And that's the other side of the rocks done. Now the next thing is the wooden fence. Now the fence is very much like the rocks, but what we can do here is, once we've got a basic tone on, we can put a few little details, like maybe some knots or a grain going into the wood, along the wood. So we'll start with this one here, this post here. Now, as it's going vertically, we can put our pen strokes vertically. So once again, just like the rocks, I'm just going to put some lines. So just by doing this, we can see the scratchy lines, because I'm doing this with a 005. Now we've already got the look of grain in the wood. So I'll just we'll try this one while we're here. So once again, we just follow the shape of the, or the direction, I should say, of the wood. So I'm doing it vertically again. So that's like that. So now this side wants to be darker. So I'm going to start in crosshatch. And crosshatch the opposite way to that. Every time you crosshatch, it makes it darker. Like so. What I could do is maybe just do touch of detail, not much. We don't want much actually, because we've got all this detail around the rocks, but just one or two little, maybe it's just a crack. In the wood there. But this one exactly the same. Very lightly, and then put a shaded area in just by using some cross hatching. Now this will be dark because it's beyond, basically it's in the shadow of the stone wall, so this area here will be quite dark. So once you've got that cross hatching in, then you can go back over at a slightly different angle and do some more. That'll make that darker. Or you could put a little bit of an inky wash over later on at the end, which is going to do pretty much the same thing. But I just put a little bit of extra texture or darkness just by putting a bit more pen on there. And then once again, we could just, maybe it's just highlight or emphasize one or two little cracks and something like that. The horizontal pieces, I'm going to do these pieces of wood the same, but of course now these pieces of wood are now in the sunshine, so I've got to be careful, because again, thinking about tonal values, against here it's going to be light against dark, so I'll be very, very light. Now I may darken these up a little bit more, because it all depends on how dark the grass is going to be in the field. But it's just a very light touch with the pen. So now we have the tones, the basic tones on the wood itself. It's a little bit plain, so once again what I'm going to do is just put a few little marks like so here and there, just to make it look like it's old. Next step is this little building here, because this is sort of mid and dark tones. The grass here is going to be more light, so I don't want to put the light in tones in first, because if I do, I might do the light tones too dark, and if I do them too dark, then I'm going to have to put this darker, which means the tree is going to have to be darker, and it's going to change the tones of everything that I'm expecting to put on the paper. So as I said before, you do all the darker tones and the mid-tones first, and then you work up to what's left is going to be the light tones. So as I said, this building here, now we've got some dark windows there. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a line there. Now on the inside, the windows itself, it's just a band, so I'm just going to do this very dark. I could have used the Pentel pen, which I used in these dark areas, but just to show, you can just do the same with even a small 0.05 nib, UniPin nib. So then I'm going to put the light tone in on the face of the building. Now if we look at our picture, we can see just how light that is. It's a lot lighter than what we've got there. So let's see. So again, using the same pen, I'm just going to very simply do a very light vertical lines. I'm doing it lighter than I might expect, because as I said, if it's not dark enough, you can always darken it up a little bit more. If you do it too dark in the first place, then because it's ink, it's pen, then you're screwed. So we got this nice sort of mid-tone front there, and then in the back side, well, I'll do the same thing. Maybe it's pushing down a little bit harder. Now we can see that, especially if we screw up our eyes, we can see that this is darker than this, but this needs to be darker because it is in shadow. So as ever, we can either just go. Now I'm moving the position of the pen a little bit further down near the nib, so I can have a little bit more control and a bit more pressure, and then just continue with the same strokes I did before and just build up the ink. So that's much darker, but I want it darker still, so then it's time to do the cross hatching. So that was vertical, do it on a slant now. So and there we have the dark side of the barn. So we now do the roof, which is now we've got the light tone and a dark tone. That's in between, sort of a mid-tone. So the mid-tone, just make sure it's just a little bit darker than this, a little bit lighter than that. And of course doing it at the angle, the correct angle of the slope of the roof. And so now we have a light tone, mid-tone and a dark tone. And for these bales of hay, what look like they're in black polythene, you can see that's quite dark. It's darker than this because it's not shadow, it's actually black packaging. So now we've got the tones around here. It's easy now to get the tones of this. So it's very simple. I'll just do some tone there and I'll put some sort of swirl. I'm just darkening up around the bottoms here. The reason I'm doing that is just to give a little bit of definition between this dark to this very dark, to give shape to these bales. And the other dark area we've got around there is the tree here. Now we can see it is quite dark there, not as dark as this, but looks darker than that. And then we go into a lighter tone. So we don't want to put too much detail in. So let's try the number 03. I'm just going to perhaps put a light side and a dark side into this tree here, and then we start with this tree here. And then with the 03, I'm just going to sort of scribble in quite roughly some dark. So that's going to be the dark side of the tree against the light side of the tree that's in front of it. And make sure that that is dark against this light roof or lighter roof. We start and break this up a little bit as we start to go around the tree and into the light. Again, we're working in black and white, so it's tonal values everywhere. And I'm going to change back to the 005. What I've been using for this, and then just sort of scribble in lighter than, obviously it's going to be lighter than this, and just try and get the impression of like a texture of it could be a tree. Tiny little scribbles. So we're not drawing a tree as such. We're just drawing the texture of what it might look like a tree from when you view from a bit of a distance. You're drawing texture, and texture is everything. And we'll do the same with this little tree here. So that's going to be, again, I'm going to push down here, because this is where it's going to be darker, and then that makes this light end part of the tree stand out, and it's going to make this roof stand out against the background. And there we have that tree done there. And I'll do the same with this tree and this tree. Now these trees are done. We can see it's got like from two trees, dark, going to like a mid-tone, going to the light, going to the dark, going to the light. So we've separated these two trees. This is just really, I gather, hedgerows. So very, very gently. I'm using the 01 pen for this. I'm just making them quite sort of scruffy looking, just to make it look like it's a hedgerow. Same with this. So just go around, well, across, and then just little scribbles just to give the impression that there's like something there. And as it's the countryside, yes, hedgerows. Just making sure it's uneven. There's a slightly larger one there. Now before I get into doing the lighter areas, even though this ridge will probably be a slightly dark, even though it's in the distance, it will be slightly darker at the top and going into light. Everything else is pretty much, it's going to be a different tone to this, but I'm going to now emphasize some of these darks by using diluted ink. And all I'm going to do is paint in with some diluted ink, and I'm just putting now a little bit of clean water onto the brush and just pull it out so it's not absolutely one tone, if we can keep it like that. And then what that does, it just darkens that tone. We can still see all of the pen work underneath, or the cross hatching. I'm going to put a little bit of a tone just under there. I'm going to put some tone on this, the shadow side of these trees, and then just dot it around just so it forms sort of a mid-tone. Same on here, and you can see how immediately it forms a more of a light against dark against this tree. And then just dot it around just to give the impression that it's going into more of a mid-tone. Same here. I'm going to do the same with these areas here. Just a little bit here and there. I should be using a smaller brush really for this, but and as you'll be able to see now, that's just enhanced it enormously. And as we've used ink, it's still a pure ink piece, but it just adds a lot more contrast and richness to the piece. But now all these much darks and the midtones are in, we can see all the areas that are left. That's, if you look at the picture, are going to be much lighter, and so it's now going to be very much easier to judge how light or dark that we're going to use to put the tones in all these areas. So now I'm going to do the mid-ground by putting all the grass in. And looking at the picture again, as we've got the tones around here, and we look at the tone here, then it should be pretty easy to work out what to put in. And for the grass, I'm using the 003 pen. So I'm going to keep this really simple because obviously we can't be putting detail in. So it is just going to be a tone. So start here. Now I've got to be careful with this. So I don't want this tree to blend in too much with the background. I want to leave some separation. So all I'm going to do here is simply do some very light marks. and of course following in the shape or the angle of the land. As we can see by the hedgerow, it's coming, we're basically going down the hill, so making damn sure that the pen strokes are going in the same direction, otherwise it's going to look a little bit strange. And that's the background landscape done. Because we've used the pen, and it is naturally quite scratchy because of the very small nib, it automatically gives this sort of texture that it could be something on the ground like grasses, reeds or whatever, but the thing is it's not flat, it's not boring, it's got some life, it's got some energy in the pen strokes. So I was going to start with I think the very much the foreground here, because this by the photograph is just lots of reeds, weeds, that type of thing. So to do something like this, I think very simplistic, using the 0.3, I'll just really just draw an impression of grass, just like this. Grass grows upwards, so the pen strokes have got to go upwards. Some this way, some that way, some straight up. But a nice quick sort of mishmash of different angles of what I've just shown should give the impression of simple grass. Making sure some of the grass goes over the bottom piece of wood on the fence, nestle it in to the landscape. So that's the grass now done. Again, it looks like grass. It's nothing special, but again, it's just getting the texture looking to what it's supposed to look like. Now the only thing to do now is to put this mid-tone, this mid-ground in, which is quite light if you look at the picture. So again, we've got to have a light hand and a small nibbed pen. I'm going to try the 0.5 with this and trying to put a very light scribbly sort of marks across the mid-ground here. Now because this is such a large area, really, I'm going to try and get it done quite quickly and quite loosely. So I'm going to basically try to colour in with this pen. Now these UniPin or pens or any other pen with a nib, a pen like this, it's very good when they start to run out, as this one is, because you can get really sort of subtle strokes, as you can see I'm getting here. I'm not pressing on at all, and because this is watercolor paper, it's bouncing over the texture in the watercolor paper itself, and is producing these sort of irregular marks, which is quite nice because it could underlaying ground. So now we've got this tone in the mid-ground, and basically all of the picture, apart from the sky, I'm going to leave the sky blank, but everything else in the picture has now got tonal value. So you think this is finished, but no, now it's all got the values. I can now look at it and look at one part of a part of it to another and see if the tonal values are good. So what I can see now is, now I've got the tonal value of the grass. I think now the tonal values of this fence is a little bit too light. So the fence now could be darker. So we get the pen, and I will just simply do some hatching, simple hatching, and make this fence a little bit darker. And of course, doing the hatching will make it a little bit more textured. And as we can see, that the fence is now a little bit darker, and now it stands out much better from the bright background. Dark against light. And that's the picture finished. A lovely, detailed, monochromatic, using pen only picture of the Yorkshire Dales. Now, as I said at the beginning, it's a very good idea to do things like this just to practice doing the textures of stone, woodwork. So if you look close, we can see that it looks like stone. It's got the texture of stone. It's got the looks and texture of an old stone wall. And we also have some nice tonal values from the back of the hill going down into the lighter still, into the mid-ground, and then we get to the darker and even darker grass. The barn stands out nice against the tonal value contrasts of the trees, and it's just, I think, an overall very nice picture. Now, if you would like to see more of this type of pen only work, with the emphasis on more detailed architecture of course, then leave a comment. And also, if you would like any particular type of building to be drawn, then again leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, as I really enjoyed drawing this out, and I'll see you next time. So until then, goodbye.